I remember the day it all began. I had called him like I always do, my voice cheerful as usual, asking about his day, telling him something funny that happened at work. But this time there was no answer. Not a ringtone, not a voicemail, nothing. My heart sank in a way I hadn't expected. I thought maybe he was busy. I thought maybe he had his phone on silent. But as hours turned into a day, and days turned into weeks, I realized something I had never anticipated. He was not answering, and he had no intention of talking to me. At first, I blamed myself. Was it something I had said? Something I had done? I replayed every conversation in my mind, searching for a moment I could have mistapped. I thought about the last time we met in person, and tried to find the tiny spark that could have triggered this silence. I remembered laughing together over a silly joke about our childhood, and suddenly, it all felt like a memory from another lifetime, because now he wasn't there. Not in calls, not in messages, not even in the little moments when a simple "how are you" could have brought him back. The house felt different without his voice. When I went to his room growing up, I would remember our silly arguments about who gets the front seat in the car, or who gets the bigger piece of cake. Those memories were supposed to be comforting, but now they felt like reminders of a gap I couldn't fill. Every night, I would try to call again, and the phone would remain silent. Sometimes I left messages, carefully written, short, simple. "Hey, I hope you're okay. I just want to know you're fine. I'm here when you're ready." But the silence was deafening. I kept thinking, maybe he's upset about something small. Maybe it's temporary. Maybe he needs space. But as weeks passed, that hope started to feel like a fragile thread, one that I wasn't sure could hold my heart together. I remembered the last argument we had, not really an argument, more like a misunderstanding, but I didn't realize at the time how deeply it had affected him. And now, with every day that went by without a response, that misunderstanding seemed to grow taller and taller between us. I tried talking to our parents. They looked worried, sympathetic, but their answers were always the same. "He'll come around," or "give him time." I wanted to believe them. I wanted to trust that our bond was stronger than a moment of hurt. But inside, there was this ache that wouldn't go away. I realized that sometimes, the people we love the most can withdraw without warning, and there's little we can do except wait and hope. I went through old photos of us together, sitting on the porch during summer evenings, baking cookies together for holidays, and laughing so freely that the world felt right. I remembered the nights we stayed up talking about dreams, school, friends, life, all those tiny things that made us feel connected. How could someone who shared those moments with me now pretend I didn't exist? At work, I found myself distracted. The office, the emails, the meetings, they all blurred together because my mind kept wandering to him. I imagined scenarios over and over. Maybe he was angry, maybe he felt betrayed, maybe I had done something unknowingly that hurt him. And every time, I would whisper to myself, "I'm sorry, I never meant to make you feel that way." Those words became my silent mantra, my internal prayer, repeated hundreds of times a day. Friends tried to console me. They said, maybe he just needs time, or people drift apart sometimes. But I couldn't accept that. He was my brother, my best friend. Someone who knew my secrets and had always been there, even when no one else was. And suddenly, he was gone. I began writing letters that I never sent, pouring my thoughts, my regrets, my love, and my longing onto paper. I wanted him to know how much I cared, even if he didn't answer. I wrote, "I'm here. I'll wait. I'll always love you." I kept these letters in a drawer, folded neatly, as if one day he might pick them up and read every word. Then there were the small triggers, seeing his favorite candy at the store, hearing a song we used to play together, catching a whiff of his old cologne. Each of these made me both smile and ache at the same time. It was like living in a world where he was both present and absent at once, and my heart couldn't reconcile it. Nights were the hardest. The house was quiet. The world seemed to slow down, and I would lie awake, thinking of him, wondering why a bridge between us had suddenly burned. I tried not to cry, but often I did. Silent tears, the kind that don't wake anyone else, fell onto my pillow as I whispered the same apology again and again. I'm sorry. I never meant to make you feel that way. And yet, amid all this pain, there was a small, stubborn hope. Hope that he would answer one day. Hope that he would call, or text, or knock on my door, and somehow we could mend this invisible rift. Hope that the bond we shared, one forged through years of love, care, and childhood memories, could survive this silence. Every phone call that didn't go through, every message left unread, only made my heart grow fonder and my desire to reconnect stronger. I told myself, I will wait, I will be patient. I will stay kind, even if he refuses to speak to me. Because love, I realized, sometimes means waiting in silence. And so, the hook of this story is this. I waited, I apologized silently in my mind, and I held on to hope. And I promise you, what comes next, what happened when I finally confronted the silence, is something that changed everything. But before that, I need to tell you who we were, how our bond grew, and why this silence cut so deeply. Our family had always been close in ways that outsiders might not fully understand. Growing up, my brother and I were inseparable, even when we fought like typical siblings. There was a rhythm to our days that made life feel safe, predictable, and warm. I could always find him in the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of juice, or sitting by the living room window, lost in thought. And even when he was quiet, there was comfort in his presence, a silent bond that didn't require words. I remember the weekends, when we would get up early and explore the little things in our neighborhood. The park, the corner store, the tiny library we used to frequent, all of it was part of our shared world. We had inside jokes, secret codes, and silly nicknames that only we understood. Bobby, I would call him, and he would respond with a playful grin, knowing exactly what I meant. He had this way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary. Our parents encouraged our closeness. They would smile and tell us, "You two will always have each other." And I believed them. I believed that no matter what happened, the bond between a brother and a sister was unbreakable. We celebrated birthdays together, comforted each other during sickness, and shared secrets that we promised never to tell. I trusted him with my thoughts and feelings in ways that I hadn't with anyone else. And he trusted me too, in ways that I realized only after this silence began. High school was full of small adventures. We would stay up late talking about future dreams, laughing about crushes, and planning trips that never happened. He was protective of me in ways I didn't always appreciate at the time. I would tease him, push boundaries, and sometimes act stubborn, but he never gave up on me. Even when I annoyed him, his patience was endless, and I took that for granted. College brought changes, of course. He moved to another city and I stayed closer to home. Our calls became less frequent, but they were always full of life and laughter. I would hear about his new friends, his work, and his small victories. I would share mine too, proud of the milestones he reached. There was an unspoken understanding that even miles apart, we were still connected. Family gatherings were always a joy because we found ways to sneak in time together. At Thanksgiving, he would sit next to me, sharing the food he knew I loved, and quietly making sure I was comfortable and included. At Christmas, we would exchange thoughtful gifts, small tokens that meant the world to both of us. Birthdays, graduations, and even small achievements, we cheered for each other, sometimes without saying much at all. As adults, the dynamics subtly shifted. Responsibilities grew, jobs demanded more of our time, and life seemed busier than ever. Yet we managed to keep our bond alive. Weekend visits, holiday calls, and messages sharing little moments of our lives, these were the threads that kept our connection intact. Even if life was hectic, we made sure to acknowledge each other. I thought our bond was unshakable, that no distance, no misunderstanding, could ever break what we had built over decades. I also began noticing little things about him, small habits that made him unique. How he would always tuck a napkin under the plate before eating, how he loved to read history books late into the night, or how he would pause before answering a difficult question, thinking carefully before speaking. These were the details that made him my brother, not just by blood, but by essence. We also had friends who were like family to us, people who often joined our conversations, shared meals, or traveled with us during summers. He was protective of those friendships too, always careful about who we let into our circle. He had a quiet strength, a soft-spoken confidence that made others feel at ease. And I admired him for that. Through all of this, I never imagined the silence that would come. The days that followed our last conversation before he withdrew were ordinary, mundane even. Nothing seemed amiss. And yet, beneath that normalcy, I now understand there were ripples I hadn't noticed, moments that foreshadowed a growing distance. I look back and wonder how subtle signs went unnoticed. The quick, dismissive replies, the slight avoidance of eye contact, the casual "I'll call you later" that never materialized. They all were pieces of a puzzle I hadn't yet seen. I started recalling these moments as they accumulated, like drops filling a glass, until one day it spilled into the emptiness of silence. And that silence became louder with every unanswered message and every missed call. My brother, who had been my closest companion for so many years, suddenly felt miles away, not physically, but emotionally. Even our parents noticed. They mentioned casually that he seemed quieter, that his laughter didn't reach as easily, that he appeared distant during family dinners. I brushed it off initially, thinking it was just stress or work or growing pains, but deep down I felt the shift too. A small knot of worry began to grow in my chest, whispering that something was different, that things were changing in ways I might not yet understand. Looking back now, I realized that the bond we had, built over years of shared laughter, tears, and secrets, was still there, but fragile. And that fragility is what made the silence so unbearable. In that setup, the stage is set. We have a history, a love, a connection, and now a rift that feels unbridgeable. And this is where the rising tension begins. Small misunderstandings, unspoken grievances, and unnoticed feelings will slowly pile up, setting the stage for the moment that changes everything. But for now, in part 2, I want you to understand who we were, the love that existed, and the bond that made his silence feel like an empty space in my life. It started with small things, almost imperceptible, that I didn't think much of at the time. A call left unanswered, a text read but not replied to. At first, I brushed it off, telling myself he must be busy with work, or maybe he just needed a little space. But then the pattern repeated itself. Days went by where I tried to reach him, and there was no response. The cheerful "Hey, how are you?" that had always started our conversations now hung unanswered in my mind. I remember one particular evening vividly. I had baked his favorite cookies, just because I thought it might brighten his day. I called him, telling him I was outside with a warm batch of chocolate chip cookies, hoping we could sit and talk for a little while. His phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message, careful to keep my voice light, smiling as I spoke. "Hey, I brought some cookies. Thought we could catch up. Call me when you can." I started overanalyzing every interaction. Did I say something wrong at the last family gathering? Was it something I posted on social media? I found myself deleting comments and pictures, desperately hoping it would mend something I didn't fully understand. I even called mutual friends, trying to see if they had noticed a shift in his behavior. Some shrugged it off, saying he's just busy, while others nodded knowingly. "He's upset about something, but I'm not sure what." One afternoon, I received a message from a mutual friend that made my stomach drop. It said, "I think he's avoiding you. He didn't answer my call either when I asked about you." The words felt like a punch I hadn't expected. Avoiding me? Why? We had never had a fight serious enough for him to ignore me completely. The idea that he was actively choosing silence over conversation was something my heart struggled to comprehend. I tried to reach him one more time that evening. I sent a long text, carefully phrased, attempting to explain myself without seeming desperate. "I don't know if I did something to upset you. If I did, I'm truly sorry. Please just let me know. I miss you." Hours later, still no response. The quiet of my phone felt louder than any argument we had ever had. At work, I found it harder to concentrate. Even small tasks felt overwhelming as my mind kept returning to him. I imagined every possible scenario. Maybe he was angry about something I hadn't realized. Maybe he misunderstood me. Maybe he felt hurt by something I had said years ago, something buried deep in our shared history. I started thinking of every childhood moment, every silly quarrel, every time I had been teasing, joking, or making fun of him, even if innocently. And each memory carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. Sometimes, late at night, I would find myself calling him again, just to hear the ring, to reassure myself that the number still worked, that the line still existed. I knew he wouldn't answer, but the action became a ritual, a way to feel close even when he was far away emotionally. My parents noticed my growing anxiety and would offer soft reassurances. "He'll come around," they said, but their words felt distant, like someone speaking from another room, unable to touch the depth of what I was feeling. Small tensions began creeping into my interactions with others, too. I became sensitive to every slight, every tone, every glance. I misread casual comments as subtle rebukes. Even friends noticed my mood shifts and would check in, concerned. "You're worried about him too much," they would say. But they didn't know the silence had become a tangible presence in my life, a quiet weight that sat on my chest from the moment I woke up until I went to sleep. I remember one afternoon when I saw him at a mutual friend's gathering. He was there, but he barely looked at me. I tried to smile, approached him, and said, "Hey, how have you been?" His response was polite but cold, almost like a stranger. "I'm fine," he said, and that was it. I felt a wave of confusion and heartbreak wash over me. We sat in the same room, shared the same space, but it was as though he had erected a wall between us, invisible but impenetrable. Even writing about it now, I feel the ache returning, the helplessness of wanting to reach someone who refuses to let you in. I tried everything I could think of: phone calls, messages, visits, letters, gifts. Nothing seemed to bridge the gap. Each attempt met with silence, and each silence grew heavier than the last. I knew I had to remain calm. I told myself over and over, "Stay patient, stay kind, wait. Don't push." I reminded myself that love often required patience, that sometimes people withdrew because of things we could not immediately understand. I held on to hope that someday he would speak, that the bond we shared could survive this period of distance. But in those early weeks of rising conflict, hope felt fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind, threatening to extinguish at any moment. And so, the first stage of rising conflict was set: unreturned calls, unanswered messages, cold encounters, and a growing sense of helplessness. What had been an inseparable sibling bond now teetered on the edge, fragile and unspoken, waiting for the next event that would either deepen the silence or finally break it. As the days passed, the silence between us became more pronounced. It was no longer just the missed calls or ignored messages. It was the weight of absence in the smallest moments. Even when I tried to see him in person, there was a visible distance. Our conversations became mechanical, brief, and polite. The warmth that had defined our relationship for years was replaced with caution. As if both of us were tiptoeing around an invisible line neither of us wanted to cross. I began analyzing every interaction, replaying old conversations in my mind, searching for a clue, a trigger, anything that could explain the sudden change. There were moments I remembered vividly, times when I might have said something thoughtless or failed to notice a hurt he carried silently. I wondered if, somewhere along the line, I had caused a wound so deep that he felt the only answer was to retreat. Each memory felt heavier now, filled with a quiet regret that gnawed at my chest. Family gatherings became exercises in restraint. Sitting at the dinner table, I would glance at him, hoping for a sign, a smile, or even the briefest acknowledgement. But most of the time, he avoided my gaze, spoke minimally, and seemed absorbed in everything else but me. I noticed how easily he engaged with cousins, friends, and even strangers, yet I was left on the outskirts, a quiet observer in what had once been our shared world. One evening, I tried again. I walked over to his apartment, gently knocked on the door, and waited. When he opened it, he seemed startled to see me. His posture was stiff, his expression unreadable. I offered a small smile. "Hey, I thought I'd drop by, maybe talk for a little while." He stepped back, almost hesitating, and said, "I don't really have time right now." His tone wasn't harsh, but it carried an unmistakable finality that pierced me deeper than any angry words could have. I tried to respond lightly. "It'll just be a few minutes. I just want to understand." But he shook his head and closed the door gently, leaving me standing in the corridor, feeling more helpless than I had ever imagined. After that night, I noticed a subtle shift in how others treated our relationship. Mutual friends who used to casually invite both of us started sending separate messages, unsure of how to navigate the tension. I could see it in their eyes, a mix of sympathy and discomfort. Even our parents, who had always been our pillars of support, seemed unsure of what to say, how to intervene, or how to help bridge the gap. Work and daily life became distractions I leaned on heavily, yet even there, the silence followed me. I would find myself absent-mindedly reaching for my phone, hoping for a message or call that never came. When I realized nothing would arrive, a wave of sorrow would wash over me, leaving a quiet ache in my chest. I began jotting down my thoughts, letters I never intended to send, pouring out my frustration, my confusion, my longing for connection onto paper. It was the only way to make sense of the void that had entered my life. I noticed the small, almost imperceptible signs that he was intentionally keeping distance. Invitations to gatherings that included everyone else but me, casual excuses to leave the room, avoiding shared family spaces. Each incident left me with a knot in my stomach. I wanted to confront him directly, to demand answers, but I feared that pressing too hard might push him further away. So I waited, silently hoping that patience would eventually open the door to reconciliation. There were days when I felt anger bubbling beneath the surface. Anger at the situation, anger at the silence, anger at myself for not recognizing the source of the problem sooner. But it was a quiet, controlled anger, not explosive, not destructive, just a heavy awareness that things were not as they had been. I reminded myself that compassion and understanding might be the only way to reach him, that sometimes people hurt in ways they cannot explain, and their withdrawal is a reflection of their pain, not a rejection of love. I tried different approaches to reconnect. Thoughtful messages, small gifts, memories of shared experiences, and even casual visits, but every attempt seemed to meet an invisible wall. Even when I would catch his attention for a moment, it was fleeting. A polite nod, a brief acknowledgement, but nothing that reached the warmth and closeness we had shared for decades. One day, I ran into him at a local cafe. He was sitting at a corner table, scrolling on his phone. I hesitated, unsure whether I should approach him, and then, summoning courage, I said softly, "Can we talk?" He looked up, eyes briefly meeting mine, and then looked away. "I'm busy," he murmured, almost apologetically, as if the words were unavoidable but unwelcome. I wanted to reach across the table, to bridge the chasm that had grown between us, but instead, I nodded quietly, feeling a mixture of heartbreak and helplessness. At home that night, I reflected on the situation. The love, trust, and shared history we had built seemed fragile, easily fractured by unspoken emotions and hidden misunderstandings. I realized that the rising conflict was not just about him or me. It was about the space that had grown between us, nurtured by silence, miscommunication, and perhaps fear. I began to understand that reconciliation would not come easily. It would require patience, empathy, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. And though I was still unsure of what exactly had caused this distance, I held on to a quiet hope that someday, the bond we shared could be restored. The conflict had escalated from small acts of avoidance to a pervasive silence that touched every aspect of our lives. Friends, family, and even strangers could sense the tension when we were together. And through it all, I remained determined, not with anger or accusation, but with a quiet, unwavering desire to reconnect, to understand, and to heal the rift that had formed between my brother and me. The weeks of silence had begun to wear me down. Each day felt heavier than the last, each unanswered call a small, persistent ache in my chest. I tried to carry on with my life, but the emptiness left by his absence was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just that he had stopped talking to me, it was that he had become a stranger in a life that had once been shared so openly. Then, one day, everything changed. It started with an unexpected message from a mutual friend, someone who had been quietly observing the tension from the sidelines. "You need to see this," she said, her voice hesitant over the phone. I think it might explain a lot. My heart pounded as I followed her instructions to a small cafe where my brother had been meeting friends. I had no idea what I was walking into, but a sense of foreboding settled over me. When I arrived, I saw him sitting alone at a corner table. His posture was rigid, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, his gaze distant. I approached slowly, unsure if he would even acknowledge me. "Can we talk?" I asked quietly. He looked up, and for a moment, I thought he might look away as he had before, but then he gestured for me to sit. I settled across from him, my heart racing, the anticipation almost unbearable. He didn't speak at first, just stared down at the table, fingers drumming lightly against the wood. I waited, swallowing the lump in my throat, until finally he exhaled and spoke. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." His voice was low, careful, and for the first time in weeks, I sensed a tremor of vulnerability beneath the surface. I leaned forward, careful not to push too hard. "Tell me what, please, I just want to understand." He looked up, eyes meeting mine with a mixture of shame and regret. It's about something that happened months ago. Something I overheard and misunderstood. I thought you were upset with me, and I didn't want to deal with the tension. I thought if I just stayed away, things would calm down." My mind raced. What could it be? A simple misunderstanding causing this much distance. I tried to remember any moment that could fit his description, any comment, any action. Nothing concrete came to mind, just small, everyday interactions that now seemed magnified in my memory. I didn't know you felt that way," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt you ever." "I don't know why you thought I was upset." He swallowed hard, and for the first time, I saw tears threatening to spill. I thought you blamed me for something that wasn't even my fault. I thought you were disappointed in me, and instead of asking, I ran away. I shut down completely." The weight of his words hit me like a wave. Weeks of worry, anxiety, and sadness had been building, and now, in a single moment, the reason behind it all was revealed. It was not anger, not malice, not rejection. It was fear, misunderstanding, and pride. I reached out, placing a hand gently over his. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to feel that way." "I wish you had just told me." He nodded, his eyes glistening. I know now, but it was hard." I felt trapped in my own fear. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the tension of the past weeks slowly beginning to dissolve. I felt a mixture of relief and lingering sorrow, knowing how much time had been lost, how many moments we had missed. But in that silence, there was also hope, the fragile, tentative hope that our bond could be restored. He continued, his voice quiet but steady. "I didn't stop loving you. I didn't know how to fix what I thought was broken." I squeezed his hand gently, tears brimming in my own eyes. "And now we can," I said softly. "We can start over slowly." Together. It was in that moment that I realized how much of our conflict had been fueled by assumptions, by unspoken fears, and by a lack of communication. The turning point was not a dramatic confrontation or a loud argument. It was a simple, honest conversation. One that required courage, patience, and vulnerability from both of us. The hours that followed were filled with more conversation, sharing feelings long suppressed, clarifying misunderstandings, and expressing forgiveness. Each word, each gesture, chipped away at the wall that had grown between us. By the time we left the cafe, there was a sense of tentative peace, a fragile bridge rebuilt over the gap of silence. And yet, I knew that the healing process wouldn't be instant. Trust, once shaken, takes time to rebuild. But that day marked the beginning of reconciliation, a crucial turning point where the misunderstanding was laid bare, and the first steps toward repair were taken. I walked home that evening with a quiet, reflective heart. The rain had started again, gentle and persistent, but instead of dampening my spirits, it felt like a cleansing, washing away the heaviness that had settled in my soul over the past weeks. I realized that sometimes, the pain we carry is amplified by what we don't say, and sometimes, a single moment of honesty can begin to dissolve months of tension. It wasn't a perfect resolution yet, but it was a start. And that start, I knew, was enough to give hope that the bond between siblings, once strained, could be restored with understanding, patience, and love. After that cafe conversation, things began to shift, slowly, delicately, as though we were navigating a fragile bridge built from weeks of pain and misunderstanding. It wasn't immediate. There were moments of hesitation, glances that lingered too long, and pauses in conversation that reminded us both how easily the silence had taken hold. Yet, each small step felt monumental. The days following our meeting were filled with tentative attempts to reconnect. He would send a brief text, checking in, asking how I was. I responded warmly, carefully choosing words that conveyed my love without pressure. The atmosphere was different, lighter, yet cautious, as if we were learning to walk again after stumbling on broken ground. One afternoon, I decided to invite him for a walk in the park we had often visited together. I wasn't sure he would accept, but he surprised me. He arrived quietly, offering a small, genuine smile. "I thought it might be good to step out for a bit," he said. We walked side by side, speaking in soft tones, sharing trivial details of our days, letting the rhythm of normal life ease the tension. It was during that walk that I realized how much the silence had affected both of us. He confessed quietly, almost ashamedly, that he had been afraid of judgment, afraid of being blamed, and afraid of admitting that he needed me. I listened, heart aching with understanding, knowing that his distance was not a reflection of lack of love, but a reflection of fear and misunderstanding. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said finally, stopping to look me in the eye. "But I felt so lost, and I didn't know how to fix it." I reached for his hand, holding it gently. "And now we can," I whispered. "We can take it one step at a time, together." That simple acknowledgement, that small gesture of holding hands, became a turning point within the turning point. The barrier of silence, which had grown so thick, began to crumble. We started to share stories, old memories, and little regrets we hadn't voiced before. Each confession, each smile, each tear helped rebuild what had been broken. When we returned home, the family noticed the subtle change. Conversations that had been strained and careful were now more relaxed. Laughter returned, tentative but genuine. Our parents watched quietly, sensing the restoration of something they had feared lost. Even mutual friends commented on the improvement, noting how the air of tension that had lingered for weeks was finally lifting. Yet, even with this progress, I knew there was still work to do. Healing, I realized, was not a single event but a process. It required ongoing effort, patience, and willingness to communicate. There would be days when old habits of distance and hesitation might resurface, but the foundation had been laid for honest dialogue and emotional restoration. I also reflected on my own role in the conflict. The silence had been difficult, yes, but it had taught me the importance of noticing subtle shifts in relationships, of expressing love and understanding before assumptions take root. I resolved to be more attentive, more patient, and more compassionate, not only toward him but toward myself. That evening, as I sat alone briefly to process everything, I felt a mix of relief, gratitude, and lingering sorrow. Relief that the reason for his withdrawal was finally clear. Gratitude for the courage it had taken him to speak the truth. Sorrow for the days lost in misunderstanding. But above all, hope for the possibility of rebuilding the bond that had been shaken but not destroyed. It became clear that this turning point wasn't just about him or me. It was about both of us learning to navigate love and trust in its most fragile state. Misunderstandings, when left unspoken, can grow into walls, but courage, honesty, and patience can turn those walls into bridges. In the weeks that followed, our interactions became more natural. Small acts of thoughtfulness, shared laughter, and quiet conversations replaced the cold distance that had dominated our days. We were still healing, still finding our rhythm, but the crucial step had been taken. The silence had been broken, and the truth had been spoken. And through it all, I realized something profound. Sometimes, people pull away not because they no longer care, but because they are afraid, afraid of judgment, afraid of vulnerability, afraid of showing pain. And sometimes, all it takes to restore a bond is a single moment of courage, a single conversation that allows hearts to speak what minds have feared for too long. The days following our heartfelt conversation marked the beginning of a slow, gentle restoration. The tension that had plagued us for weeks had begun to lift, replaced by a cautious hope that we could rebuild what had been broken. Each interaction felt deliberate yet natural, like relearning a language that had been forgotten, words, gestures, and glances now carrying meanings we hadn't fully understood during our silence. We started small, shared cups of coffee in the mornings, brief walks around the neighborhood, and casual chats about our days. It was not instant reconciliation. There were moments of hesitation, brief pauses, where the weight of past misunderstandings pressed lightly against our words. But with each smile, each nod, each gentle touch, we slowly reconnected. He began to open up about the feelings he had buried for so long, the fear, the shame, the self-imposed distance. I listened patiently, offering understanding rather than judgment. "I never wanted you to feel alone," I said softly one afternoon. "I would have done anything to ease your worry, but you never let me in." "I know," he replied, his voice trembling slightly, "and I realize now how wrong I was to pull away. I let my fear control me instead of talking to you." Through these conversations, I also expressed my own regrets, the guilt I had carried for not noticing the early signs of his distress. We shared tears, laughter, and memories, both joyful and painful, slowly weaving the threads of trust back together. Each dialogue felt like a small victory, a confirmation that our bond was resilient enough to endure misunderstanding and distance. Family gatherings became opportunities for gentle reconnection. I noticed him seeking my opinion, offering small gestures of kindness, and even sharing a laugh at moments that would have once been tense. It was a delicate dance of rebuilding intimacy, one step at a time. I realized that healing was not about erasing the past, but acknowledging it, understanding it, and choosing to move forward with empathy and patience. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, he turned to me with a small, sincere smile. "I don't want to lose this again," he said quietly. "I don't want to lose us." I reached out, holding his hand firmly. "You won't. We'll take it one day at a time, but we'll get there." The experience also offered me a deeper understanding of human vulnerability. People retreat, not always out of malice, but often out of fear or misunderstanding. Silence can feel protective, yet it isolates and amplifies pain. By choosing to approach him with patience and love, I realized that I could bridge that isolation and open the door to healing. As our conversations grew longer and more heartfelt, old habits of distance faded. We shared inside jokes again, discussed future plans, and reminisced about cherished memories that reminded us both why our bond was worth preserving. Each shared smile became a reinforcement of the trust we were rebuilding. I also began to see positive changes in how we interacted with our wider family. The anxiety and tension that had lingered during family gatherings diminished. Parents, friends, and cousins noticed the restored warmth between us. I felt a quiet gratitude for the patience, the courage, and the willingness to speak honestly that had brought us back from the brink of estrangement. Yet the most profound realization came during quiet, solitary moments. I reflected on the weeks of silence, the fear, and the emotional distance. I understood that love and trust are not always linear. They can falter, retreat, and grow stronger through trials. The turning point had been the act of honesty, the courage to share fear and vulnerability, and the openness to forgive and listen. He and I had not only restored our bond but had strengthened it. What had once been fragile was now tempered by understanding and compassion. The past could not be undone, but it had taught us invaluable lessons about empathy, communication, and the resilience of familial love. Even as we navigated lingering insecurities, we both committed to nurturing our relationship, ensuring that misunderstandings would not be allowed to grow in silence again. Each day became a conscious effort to speak, listen, and support, guided by the lessons learned from our difficult experience. Through this resolution, I recognized a profound truth. Relationships are built not only on love, but also on trust, patience, and the courage to confront fear. The pain of silence had been intense, but it had also provided an opportunity for growth, reflection, and the rediscovery of connection. By the end of this period, the bond between my brother and me had been restored to a place of warmth, respect, and genuine affection. Though scars of misunderstanding remained, they served as reminders of the strength and resilience that love can possess when nurtured with patience, honesty, and forgiveness. The weeks following our initial reconciliation were filled with gentle but steady progress. What had once been strained conversations transformed into shared laughter and meaningful dialogue. The lingering tension that had cast a shadow over our home slowly lifted, as we both committed to being present, patient, and attentive to each other's needs. He began checking in regularly, not just with brief texts but with real conversations. "How was your day?" he would ask, genuinely interested in my life. I noticed him making small gestures, like remembering to bring my favorite tea, or leaving a note with words of encouragement. These seemingly minor acts carried immense emotional weight, reminding me that the bond we thought was lost was being rebuilt with care. Family events became more joyous, less awkward. Where once I had felt invisible in gatherings, I now felt a renewed sense of belonging. Our parents watched quietly, smiles tugging at the corners of their lips, witnessing the restoration of a relationship they had feared broken beyond repair. Cousins and friends remarked on the warmth that had returned to our interactions, sensing the subtle yet profound change between us. During one quiet afternoon, as we sat together revisiting old photo albums, he shared a memory I had nearly forgotten. A trip we had taken years ago, a simple moment of joy, yet one that had lingered in our hearts. "I missed this," he said softly, tracing his finger over a photograph. "I didn't realize how much I missed you until I felt the silence for so long." I reached over and held his hand, feeling the connection solidify in that simple gesture. "I missed you too," I admitted. "But now we have a chance to make new memories, ones that aren't shadowed by fear or misunderstanding." The reconciliation wasn't perfect. Old habits sometimes crept in moments of hesitation, brief flashes of doubt, but they were met with honest conversation rather than withdrawal. We learned to address small missteps before they grew into walls of silence. I realized that emotional restoration is not a single moment, but a daily practice of awareness, empathy, and openness. Through these experiences, I also discovered a deeper understanding of human vulnerability. People retreat not because they no longer care, but because fear, pride, or misunderstanding can push them away. What seemed like rejection was often a plea for understanding. And what we had rebuilt, this trust, this bond, was stronger for having been tested by silence. Our shared moments became richer and more meaningful. We planned small outings together, revisited favorite cafes, and spent evenings talking about our hopes, dreams, and regrets. The laughter that had once seemed distant returned, soft and familiar, filling spaces that had been empty for too long. One evening, he turned to me, his eyes sincere and unguarded. "I know we can't erase the past, but I want to promise you that I'll never let silence come between us like that again." I smiled, tears brimming in my eyes. "And I promise to always listen, always try to understand. Together, we can face anything." The final piece of this resolution was not only rebuilding the connection between the two of us, but also reintegrating fully into the family. Gatherings, celebrations, and casual afternoons at home became occasions of shared joy rather than moments of tension. I realized that reconciliation isn't just about ending a conflict. It's about actively nurturing relationships so they remain strong, even when challenges arise. Reflecting on the experience, I felt gratitude for the patience, courage, and honesty that had made this healing possible. The silence had been painful, but it had also taught us both lessons we would carry forward: the importance of communication, the necessity of empathy, and the power of forgiveness. By the time this chapter of our lives reached a quiet equilibrium, I understood that love and family bonds are resilient. They can bend under stress, fracture under fear, but with effort and sincerity, they can heal stronger than before. And in that realization, I found peace, not just in the mending of our relationship, but in the knowledge that we had both grown through the trials we endured. We now shared a bond marked not only by familiarity, but also by deeper understanding. The unspoken barriers had been replaced with dialogue, the silence with warmth, and the fear with trust. Our family, once tense and cautious around us, could now witness the power of reconciliation, the restoration of love, and the enduring strength of sibling bonds. Even as we looked forward, we remained mindful of the lessons learned. We approached every interaction with attentiveness, every conversation with care, and every disagreement with empathy. This awareness became our guide, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not dictate our future. In the quiet moments before bed, I often reflected on the journey, the misunderstandings, the silence, and the long path to healing. And I realized that while pain had been present, so had courage, patience, and love. These qualities had bridged the gap, restored trust, and renewed hope. The resolution was complete not because conflict disappeared, but because we chose to face it together, with honesty, vulnerability, and unwavering commitment. And in that choice, we discovered the true strength of family, the power of forgiveness, and the beauty of a bond restored. The days following our full reconciliation brought a quiet sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still small disagreements, moments of hesitation, and days when old habits tugged at us. But the air was lighter, warmer, filled with understanding and mutual respect. I realized that healing wasn't about perfection. It was about commitment, effort, and patience. We began to spend more time together intentionally, savoring simple moments that we had once taken for granted. Mornings were no longer rushed with tension. Instead, we shared coffee and conversation, laughing over minor mishaps or sharing plans for the day. Even the act of sitting quietly in each other's presence felt meaningful, a testament to the trust and comfort we had rebuilt. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the living room window, he turned to me and said, "I don't think I ever truly appreciated how important you were to me until I felt the silence." His words lingered in the air, heavy with honesty and gratitude. I nodded, holding back tears, feeling both sorrow for lost time and relief for the bond we had now restored. Through this experience, I learned how easily miscommunication can grow into a wall, how silence can magnify fear and distance. But I also learned that openness, patience, and gentle persistence can rebuild what was thought lost. It was not a single conversation or moment that healed us, but a series of small, consistent choices to understand, forgive, and reconnect. Family gatherings took on a new life. Where there had once been stiffness and avoidance, there was now laughter, ease, and shared joy. I noticed my parents watching quietly, their eyes reflecting relief and pride. Cousins and friends commented on the change, sensing the warmth that had returned between us. It was a subtle yet powerful reminder that reconciliation doesn't just affect those directly involved. It radiates outward, touching everyone connected to the bond. I also reflected on my own growth during this journey. I had learned to observe more carefully, to respond with empathy rather than assumption, and to recognize that sometimes people retreat not out of rejection, but out of fear. My patience and willingness to understand had played as crucial a role as his courage to speak. Together, we had turned pain into learning, fear into understanding, and silence into meaningful dialogue. Even in quiet moments alone, I felt gratitude for the journey. The hurt had been real, the distance palpable, yet the lessons were invaluable. I had discovered the power of patience, the importance of listening, and the profound impact of small, consistent efforts to rebuild trust. I realized that love is not just a feeling but a series of intentional actions, choosing to stay, to forgive, and to communicate even when it's difficult. Through these reflections, I began to prepare for a life moving forward with renewed understanding. I would approach every relationship with attentiveness, empathy, and care. I would honor the lessons learned from silence, miscommunication, and fear. And I would cherish every connection that had been restored, knowing that the effort invested in nurturing relationships is never wasted. Our bond, once fragile and strained, was now fortified. It had endured misunderstanding, emotional withdrawal, and weeks of silent pain, yet it had emerged stronger, tempered by honesty, compassion, and commitment. We were not perfect, but we were resilient, and that resilience would carry us through future challenges with a newfound grace and confidence. The final step in this resolution was not a grand gesture but a quiet acknowledgement. We were together again, fully present, fully committed, and fully aware of the importance of nurturing our relationship every day. It was a calm, steady, and deeply satisfying victory, a restoration of trust, love, and familial connection that would endure. As the days continued, I noticed a deep sense of serenity settling over our home. The tension that had once seemed permanent had finally dissipated, replaced with warmth, understanding, and genuine affection. I realized that the silence, the misunderstandings, and the emotional distance had all been a part of a journey toward growth, for both of us. Pain had taught us patience, fear had taught us empathy, and distance had shown us the true value of connection. I often reflected on the lessons learned from this experience. I understood that life does not always provide immediate answers. People withdraw, relationships falter, and misunderstandings arise. But it is in these moments that patience, kindness, and open hearts matter the most. By choosing to remain calm, listening carefully, and approaching conflict with love rather than anger, we can create space for healing, understanding, and genuine reconciliation. He and I now share a bond that is both tender and resilient. We have learned to communicate openly, to forgive quickly, and to cherish the moments we have together. We laugh again freely, support each other without hesitation, and treasure every conversation, small or significant. Our relationship is no longer just a connection by blood. It is a connection strengthened through trials, compassion, and conscious effort. Family gatherings are now joyful, filled with laughter and warmth. Parents, cousins, and friends notice the difference, the calm, respectful, and heartfelt exchanges that were absent for so long. It is a living reminder that love, patience, and forgiveness have the power to restore even the most strained relationships. I also reflect on the spiritual lessons this experience has offered. Sometimes, God tests relationships and hearts through silence and distance. The pain is not meaningless. The struggle is a chance to cultivate patience, humility, and understanding. By choosing to forgive, to speak kindly, and to act with empathy, we align ourselves with values that nurture not only our human relationships, but also our spiritual growth. And this is where my story ends tonight. Life doesn't always give us answers right away. Sometimes God asks us to stay patient, stay kind, and stay silent, not because we are weak, but because He sees what others do not. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. Maybe someone needed this reminder today. Thank you for listening with an open heart. May God see every silent struggle and replace pain with peace. Until next time, this was Voice of Auntie Universe.